Night, where we dig and go beyond the headlines for informed analysis of major political stories in Nigeria. I am Precious Amayu. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has declared former governor of Kogi State, Yahaya Bello, wanted for offences relating to economic and financial crimes to the tune of 84 billion naira. Bring you more on that in just a moment, but tonight we shall be discussing the stability of the exchange rate and Nigeria's economic growth with Johnson Chukwu. He's the MD/CEO, Carry Assets Management Limited, as our guest. Welcome to Politics Tonight and stay with us. And welcome back. You're still watching Politics Tonight, digging beyond the headlines. Let's begin with some developments in the polity. The counsel to the EFCC has told the Federal High Court in Abuja that the former governor of Kogi State, Yahaya Bello, is absent from court for his arraignment because he's being protected by someone with immunity. The EFCC says serving Yahaya Bello with a 19-count charge of money laundering has been difficult. TVC News senior reporter Celestine Naira reports.
Immunity is not attached to a home, but to a person. This was a submission of Kemi Pihenro, counsel to the EFCC, as he expressed disapproval how the former governor of Kogi State was allegedly whisked away from his Abuja residence. Mr. Pihenro, who is prosecuting the case for the EFCC, says if it is necessary, the commission will seek the support of the military to arrest the former governor of Kogi State. He insists Yahaya Bello should not be on the run if indeed he is innocent. It was a fundamental rights suit filed by former governor. The EFCC was represented in the suit. The EFCC has appealed the ruling and the Court of Appeal is yet to decide on it. The defense counsel says the action of the EFCC is unconstitutional and the court lacks the jurisdiction to entertain any charge from the EFCC. Counsel to the EFCC disagreed with the submission of counsel to Mr. Bello. He held that the ruling in the substantive matter on the suit was delivered on 17th March by the Kogi State High Court. The court in its ruling held that for the former governor to be arrested or arraigned, the EFCC must first seek leave from the court to do so. It is in line with that judgment the EFCC through an ex parte application filed for the order seeking the arrest of the former governor, which was granted by the court. The court also ordered that Mr. Bello be produced in court today for his arraignment. The court adjourned to 23rd May for ruling on the substituted service of the charge of Yahaya Bello and his arraignment.
Wealth of Aja also allows a law enforcement agent to break down any premises where a defendant may be hiding. And so the state will invoke all its powers within the law to ensure that he's produced in court for the purpose of arraignment and it's in his own interest.
The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission is empowered under Section 6, Subsection 7 of the EFCC Act of 2004 to investigate, arrest, or invite any person for questioning. However, the Commission was stopped yesterday from effecting arrest on the former governor of Kogi State despite the order granted by Justice Emeka Wete for the arrest of Yahaya Bello. Today, the AGF, through a press statement, says the EFCC is constitutionally empowered to carry out its lawful duty, and citizens should desist from obstructing the operatives. Celestina Area, TVC News, Abuja.
Lagos State government has issued a 3-week ultimatum to traders at the Dosumu market in Lagos Island to clear all illegal structures that was gutted by fire. The fire affected about 14 buildings and 4 structures, and it collapsed as a result of the incident. Special advisor to the state governor on EGIS and planning matters, Dr. Olajide Babatunde, issued the ultimatum when top officials of the State Building Control Agency, led by its general manager, architect Gbolahan Oki, paid an assessment tour to the damage done by the fire incident, where the affected traders were still making efforts to salvage whatever they can from their burnt properties.
Every distressed building that has been marked distressed by LAPCA
We have carried out the integrity test and we have seen that they cannot stand. Those buildings that I speak to you are currently being removed. The only thing that we want is the cooperation of the citizens and residents of Lagos Island. You know, and I want to thank the residents. I want to thank the citizens, because since we started this work, we have got maximum cooperation. Governor Sanwo-Olu came here, he spoke to them, and what we have received is nothing but cooperation from members of this community.
Now our appeal to government is for government to temper justice with mercy with us. It is not what we expected. Government should not take over our house. Government should not take over our ancestral home. It's not as if some of us don't have houses elsewhere apart from Lagos Island. But this is our ancestral home, as I have said. This is our pride. We are Lagosians. We will lose our identity as Lagosians if government should take over this place.
We have seen so many things that have scored that are not supposed to be there. And we have agreed that every building that is not standing well or that has been hit by the fire should be brought down. All extensions, especially on this road and Dosumu Street, all extensions must be brought down. So the integrity of the buildings are important. We don't have to sympathize with them and then kill them later when the building comes down.
Now to politics. The National Executive Council meeting of the People's Democratic Party is ongoing at the party secretariat in Abuja, the nation's capital. The acting chairman of PDP, Maro Damagum, while addressing the council, said the last general election brought a lot of challenges that the party must address. He said the last election was accepted by the party despite the difficulties PDP encountered during the litigation processes. He added that a reconciliation committee will be set up to settle scores within the party, especially those who were aggrieved at the last election. Mr. Damagum said preparation is ongoing to ensure PDP's victory in the upcoming Edo and Ondo elections.
We must also understand that Nigerians are in love with our party, and they see this party as their common hope. They are anxiously looking up to us to bring succor and relief. It is expected that the decision and outcome of today's next meeting will strengthen our party, bring answers to the many questions in the heart of our members, brighten our future, and further reposition us for the challenges that is ahead of us.
Watching politics tonight, let's take a short break, and when we return, it will be time to speak with our guest of the day, Johnson Chukwu, MD CEO Cowrie Assets Management Limited. We shall be discussing the stability of the exchange rate and Nigeria's economic growth. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. In the face of a global economic challenge, the Central Bank of Nigeria has continued to address various structural impediments to development, tackle institutional deficiencies with a commitment to restoring corporate governance, strengthening regulations, and implementing prudent policies. And so far, Nigerians have seen the Naira rapidly make gains against the dollar. But is that all? Tonight, to speak on the stability of the exchange rate and Nigeria's economic growth, I have joining me virtually Mr. Johnson Chukwu, MD CEO, Cowrie Assets Management Limited. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Good evening.
So let me first get your take on the continuing gains of the Naira against the dollar. So far, we can give the CBN, or let me ask a question. Can we give the CBN a pass mark?
It's a difficult question. To the extent that I would say the central bank actions has led to the Naira recovering substantially from the high of about 1,900 at the parallel market and about 1,600 at the official window to the region of 1,100 or 1,130 at both the parallel and official market, respectively. So that has been a material recovery, if you look at it from that perspective. But also bear in mind that we moved from the region of 460 Naira at the official window and same 50 Naira at the parallel market. Let's even take the same 50 Naira as the convergence rate. So you are moving from about 750 Naira to $1 to a current 1,100. That's about 400 Naira to $1 depreciation or devaluation, which gives you a devaluation of in the region of 50%. So it's given where we're coming from, I mean, how low we went, one would think...
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
One would believe that where we are today, it's a lot of improvement from how low we went.
Many Nigerians are praying that this trend continues, but certainly to take more than just prayers. How can the CBN ensure that this new VIM we're seeing is not short-lived?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult thing for them to do. I think there's a limit to the effectiveness or capacity of monetary policies to manage a complex issue as we're facing today, particularly issue related with undersupply of foreign exchange from our operating revenue. Remember, our key operating revenue is export of crude oil. And unfortunately, we are witnessing a situation where the crude oil production has actually declined in the past three months. So if you do not have a sustained increase in your operating cash flow, operating revenue, foreign currency earnings, it's difficult for the central bank to sustain a strong local currency vis-a-vis other foreign currencies. Because they basically have to ask yourself, where is the liquidity coming from? What is the source of this recovery or strengthening of the local currency? It's basically coming from the sale of treasury bills at very high yield that has incentivized foreign investors to take the advantage of what they call carry trade. That is, buy Naira at high and sell at low, which is what the concerns are. So as long as that, there's a limit to which you can sustain that, because the amount that the central bank is borrowing is interest bearing. It has to pay interest on that.
So, Mr. Chukwu, this is where, this question I really want to ask you, because I've listened to a lot of economists and financial analysts, for a period of time now, since the Naira started gaining, and we see divergent views on the monetary and fiscal policy. For some, economists or analysts, they say that, look, they see an alignment. Others will say there is a variance. What's your take on this?
I think we've not seen any fiscal policy action that we say is supporting the monetary policy actions. And let me put it clearly. I did mention earlier that our operating cash flow, our operating earnings from foreign exchange earnings comes from crude oil sales. If you look at the crude oil production from the NUPRC, you observe that in January, crude oil production was about 1.64 million barrels a day, including condensate. In February, it dropped to about 1.54 million barrels a day, a drop of almost 100,000 barrels a day. And in March, it had dropped further to about 1.43 million barrels a day. So inclusive of condensate. And that's where the support the fiscal authority should come from. What we should be looking at is an increasing volume of crude oil production, crude oil exports, which will automatically help the central bank build the reserve that they need to intervene in the market, or at least build a compensating reserve that will, when the foreign portfolio investors who have been attracted by high yield on our fixed income instrument, when their instruments mature, there will be enough of our foreign exchange earnings from our crude oil sales that is more of a permanent nature that could be used to fund the exit of those portfolio investors. So without that, so it becomes difficult for anybody to say logically that the fiscal authority has weighed in, and I think the actions of the fiscal authority is complementary or complementing the actions of the monetary authorities. If you take it even further, you will also observe that the fiscal authority is still running huge fiscal deficits. And I'll give you an instance. At the end of September last year, total federal government revenue was only 8.65 trillion naira. Total federal government expenditure was 12.7 trillion naira, a deficit of about 4 trillion naira. By the end of December, the federal government went to the National Assembly to secretary another 10 trillion. So which means within that period of time, additional borrowing from the federal government, from the central bank happened. That also means that liquidity was being injected into the economy, and that liquidity injection will obviously put pressure on the FX rate. So you really can't say that we are having complementary fiscal policies, maybe in the long run, but not in the short term. We're not seeing that.
But are there decisive actions that the fiscal side can take, and that's, that will be the minister of the coordinating minister of the economy. Are there decisive actions that he can take to support this ongoing move by the CBN?
Well, I wouldn't just put it at the doorstep of only the Minister of Finance or Minister of Trade and Investment. I would look at what the executive arm of government, headed by the president, should do. The first thing is, I mentioned the issue of crude oil production. That is our shortest route to have stability in the FX in medium to long term. So that has to be addressed by the president, who is also the Minister of Petroleum Resources. Then beyond that, you also look at the issue of agricultural production. Agriculture will help us moderate the demand for imported food items. And unfortunately, we're also not seeing any traction in terms of increase in agricultural activities. Because even if you look at the GDP figure for last year, the agricultural sector grew only by 1.12%. But beyond that, we are still dealing with the issue of insecurity in the major food base of the country. That will not just be done by the Minister of Trade and Investment. It has to be done at the executive arm. But we are hearing that they're doing some improvements. The ministry is pushing back the bandits. We hope that something comes out of it. But that second also comes from that. In terms of the fiscal deficit, it's not just the Minister of Trade and Investment. You also look at how is the government incurring the expenditure? Why is the government still spending more than the revenue, given the fact that we've seen a ballooning of government revenue as a result of the depreciation of the local currency? So those things, it has to come from the entire executive arm of the government.
All right, let's turn to the concerns now being raised about the CBN depleting the reserves to defend the Naira. We had the CBN governor at the IMF World Bank Spring meeting in Washington address these concerns, and this is his response, and I just want to quote him. He said, quote, "What we see in respect to this shift in our reserve is the shift you will see in any country's reserve situation." What's your observation of the situation?
Okay, if I have to break it down to the minutest detail, looking at what the minister said, the central bank governor said that ordinarily a country will meet obligations in foreign currencies, and what they did was obviously pay down some maturing obligations, and that was why they drew down on the reserve. But that, if you take it further, which I said you have to bring it down to minute detail, the central bank has also said, and the Minister of Finance has said, that we are receiving a lot of foreign capital injection into the country as a result of the measures taken by the monetary authorities, which is why I refer to carry trade. But we're going to come back to that. So assuming that we've sold so far, we sold more than 6 trillion naira in treasury bills. And if you look at that, an average yield, the 364-day bill has an effective yield of more than 25%. But that also means that part of it was invested, bought by foreign portfolio investors. Assuming that there were capital inflow from foreign portfolio investors, that inflow should have reduced the decline in the reserves. So if we still have a decline of that volume in the reserve, it then means that the outflow that was spent by the central bank in meeting those obligations was quite huge, because it simply means that every money that came in by foreign portfolio investors also left in form of payment, assuming that is the only explanation, then plus the existing reserve. So we need to even know how much was spent, what was the cash outflow that was recorded within that time. It's not just the decline in the reserve. It then means that even fresh inflows that came in from foreign investors also left was also used to pay. And that's why I say the magnitude has to be defined, and it then becomes a cause for concern, because the inflows we are getting from foreign portfolio investors are short-term investments, and some of them will mature in 91 days, some will mature in 182 days, some will mature at most 364 days, because most of these investments went into treasury bills. So at that point, you now need to pay back. So if that money has not helped to build reserve, then where are you going to get the resources to pay back those loans or those investments when they mature and the investors want to withdraw their investment and want to repatriate back their capital and the income they've earned? So those are the challenges I said, look, it goes beyond the fact that we are seeing the decline in reserve. You have to look at the magnitude of the decline, because it means that all the inflows that came in as form of foreign portfolio investment were also deployed by the central bank to meet obligations.
He also mentioned that about $600 million have been added to the foreign reserve, and so there is a slight increase. But the question I want to ask is, these concerns about the Naira being defended, the foreign reserves being depleted to defend the Naira. And he has said that's not the case. But have we started to see a market that operates on its own?
It's an interesting issue. And one, in the first place, that the CBN governor said they are not using reserve to defend Naira. So obviously, we are talking of direct intervention in the FX market, that they are not doing direct intervention in the FX market. Of course, there's some element of intervention, because sales to the BDC is a direct form of intervention. But let's even look at that and say it's not material, because that's what he said, that they've only intervened 3 times, but it's not material, the amount sold to the BDCs. But let's look at the indirect intervention. This is how the indirect intervention happens. Which is what has happened in the past couple of months. If the central bank comes to the market and says, look, we are offering treasury bills, short-dated debt instruments at 21.45% or 21.49%, which is the last 3 auctions. That's what it came at. And subsequently came at 21.12%. And then last auction on Friday came at about 20.7%. And the effective yield on that 20% is about 26%. So foreign investors come in. 2 things has happened. They have sucked that liquidity from the system. So those who need Naira to buy FX may not have that. The banks have jacked up their interest rates. So indirectly, the central bank's interventions or actions or policy initiatives have reduced the demand for FX, because most businesses no longer can afford to borrow and import. The longer term implication of that is that the businesses who can no longer borrow to import are no longer going to produce. So if they can't produce, you're going to see the unintended consequence of that is that in the short term, you're going to see drying up of production activities or goods from the shop floors. Businesses may begin to reduce their workforce, because they can borrow at 34%, 50%, 40% from the banks, because central bank has withdrawn liquidity. So that has had a positive impact on the exchange rate, but not a direct market intervention. The other aspect of the intervention that is indirect is that by increasing the yield on treasury-based instruments, that has incentivized foreign portfolio investors to invest in the country with the expectation that they gain 2 things. The carry trade. The carry trade simply means they come in, they exchange Naira, their dollar at a higher Naira rate. And then when it's time to take back, they exchange dollar at a lower rate. So in effect, they have an exchange gain. And maybe I use graphical illustration. Assuming a foreign investor is bringing $1 million, and they converted that $1 million at 1,500 Naira. So he would have gotten 1.5 billion, and which is why he has invested in treasury bills. So and then Naira has appreciated to 1,000. So in effect, his $1 million, which is converted to 1.5 billion, the 1.5 billion Naira will now buy him $1.5 million instead of $1 million. Remember, this man had borrowed $1 million from foreign banks and invested in treasury bills, converted to Naira 1,500. Now, at 1,000 Naira, his 1.5 billion has become $1.5 million. So he had gained 500,000. That's the carry trade that he's really dealing with. Then he also comes to the market. That instrument gives him 20% return. So on the 1.5 billion, he makes another 300 million naira. So in effect, he brought in $1 million. He's now going to take out $1.8 million because if you add the 300 million naira to the 1.5 million naira, assuming naira remains at 1,000 naira. So that has also created injection into the economy, and which is why the central bank said we are not intervening directly, but they're using tools to stimulate inflows. And that's why I had to make reference that if those inflows are not building up in the reserve, then it should become a cause for concern. Beyond the fact that they carry trade value, will also put additional pressure because we're going to be paying back the monies that we didn't receive, in the sense that the values they want to take back is higher than the values they brought in terms of dollar terms.
And some of these issues you've mentioned that led to the increase we saw in the rate of naira to the dollar, insider trading, at the banks, the speculations, the BDCs. Have you seen sufficient measures being put in place to ensure compliance by the banks and its BDCs?
The way you look at it is that beyond the issue of controls, of course, the reasonable level of sanctions, including suspension of license, revocation of FX license of the banks, and as well as cancellation of license for the BDCs. But what matters most is that the markets achieve minimal arbitrage between official and parallel market trades. Once you have, which is I think the market has achieved, when you have minimal arbitrage, which means the price differential or exchange rate differential between official rate and parallel market. In fact, we're even dealing with a situation where the official windows, Nigerian autonomous foreign exchange market rates is even higher than the parallel market rate. So at that point, the issue of round tripping, issue of hoarding or whatever abnormal or negative behavior that the banks or the BDCs may want to indulge in, there's no incentive for it. That's the key thing. What they have achieved is eliminate to the barest minimum arbitrage window between the official window and the parallel market window. That is very key. So you are talking of where the market environment, this incentivizes anybody to want to cut corners or want to take advantage of the forex because there's no advantage to take.
Mr. Johnson Chukwu, you've said a lot tonight. I want Nigerians to take a breather and just take all of these things in, especially when an economist is talking. It takes a lot of time for the rest of us to break it down. It can be really technical. So we'll take a break, and then when we return, we'll talk more about some of the other statements being made by the CBN governor at the IMF World Bank's meeting in Washington. Stay with us, everyone.
Information is power, information is security, information is knowledge. On Labor Lens, we believe that working people around the world have real questions of their own. They want to know how the world of work operates, what it means to the employer of labor, how policies affect workers in the workplace. On Labor Lens, I ensure we engage effectively the organized labor, organized private sector, and governments to get out of them information workers are in need of. I am Sharon Ijason, asking questions that make you get sense of the workplace.
Every major news story is with many perspectives and layered with different levels of impact.
Hello. What time did this happen? We will be right there.
At TVC News, we follow the big and major news, gathering the facts, witnessing the outcome.
I am here live at the aftermath of the approval of the new national minimum wage.
We are TV Station of the Year, not just for breaking news, but for being first, fair and accurate. TVC News, first with breaking news.
Thanks for staying with us, everyone. Tonight on Politics Tonight, we're looking at the stability of the exchange rate and Nigeria's economic growth. And we've been speaking with the MD, CEO, Kari Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. He's said a lot about the foreign exchange rate. But let's turn attention now to debt. Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you so much for staying with us. At that same meeting, the CBN governor also mentioned that debts are due and certain payments needed to be made. And he talked about the fact that the foreign exchange rate was depleted, for that reason. How sustainable is that?
If you look at Nigeria's debt sustainability, you have to look at where we are in terms of revenue. And I did mention earlier that federal government revenue, as at September last year, end of September last year, according to the Minister of Budget and National Planning, was 8.65 trillion naira. At the same time, federal government spent about 5.26 trillion naira to pay service debt. I think 5.46 trillion naira to service debt in the first 9 months of last year. So if you look at that, you will observe that the debt service to revenue was approaching the region of 75%. But even if you look at what happened at the end of last year, if you recall, the report from the DMO said that the country spent about 4.4 trillion naira to service local currency debts, and then the country spent about $3.5 billion to service foreign currency debts. If you convert the dollar, the $3.5 billion, you're going to have something like 4.9 trillion naira. Add the two, you have about 9.3 trillion naira as debt service last year. But add to that the fact that we have borrowed about 12.7 trillion naira. The government has borrowed about 12.7 trillion naira this year. Take an average of 20% on 12.7 trillion naira. You're going to have something like 2.5 trillion naira as debt service, in additional debt service this year. Add it to the 9.3. So you are talking of in the region of about 12 trillion naira of debt service this year. And if you look at total government revenue last year, I said 8.65 trillion as at the end of September. Even if I trade that, you're not going to have 12 trillion naira last year. So you are approaching a debt to revenue ratio of 100%. So that becomes a cause for concern, because you're asking how sustainable is our debt. Because sometimes we want to give ourselves some comfort by saying that our debt to GDP ratio is this or that. That shouldn't be your concern. Your concern should be how much money am I making to pay interest on this debt. Remember, we're not talking of debt repayment, we're just talking of interest payments. So the country is, in terms of fiscal balance, the fiscal condition, we have already a high debt service to GDP to revenue ratio, and that has to change. It has to change by one, federal government has to watch how it's borrowing. Any borrowing that's not going to go to productive investment that will generate revenue or that will catalyze other economic sectors to generate revenue, the government must share away from that. And in addition to that, the government must evolve a system where the private sector is brought to build infrastructure that are commercially viable, so that the debt burden on the federal government reduces. The reason why we have to adopt the private sector investment in critical and commercially viable infrastructure is that the private sector is a more efficient user of economic resources. The government in Nigeria has never proven to be the most efficient user of economic resources, particularly extracting value for money. In government procurement process, there are a lot of wastages that are built into it, which the private sector will not have to do. So if it's a job, if it's a contract or a project the private sector can do effectively, that is not public good, that would not deny some people access to it, then let's give the private sector and reduce the amount the government is borrowing for infrastructure.
And in terms of this debt servicing, what impact do you see it having on the GDP growth projections, as well as the budgeting process?
The challenge you always have with a high debt service to revenue is that the government is left with minimal resources to invest in those sectors of the economy that will catalyze economic growth. We just talked about infrastructure now. You look at social goods, education, healthcare. Of course, quality education will catalyze medium to long-term economic growth. So if government doesn't have the resources to invest in even critical infrastructure, then it will mean that we are basically living from hand to mouth, as we say in Nigerian Palace. So there's no investment that will ensure that we achieve our growth objective. Look at the issue of power supply. By now, if you remember, there was a time the government was talking of doing a 750 kVA transmission grid, super transmission grid. And that has been put in abeyance. In terms of investment in the power sector, even the transmission grid that the government handles, we're not able to do that because there are no resources to do that. Investment in the seaports to make for efficient logistic management, we don't have money to do that. Investment in critical road infrastructure, we don't have money to do that. So without that those resources, and we're spending everything on side service, you see a lot of things going wrong, including even the amount that was available for policing and for security, domestic security. We don't have that because we are spending a lot more on servicing debt.
And the president is hoping that some of these monies will come from foreign investors. And on the backdrop of the various foreign travels he made on trade and investment, the president, we've seen now that, again, those trips and then the currency appreciation, have we seen, or are investors now optimistic, or they are still cautiously optimistic? And how soon do you see us attracting major investors?
You know, it's difficult for anybody to sit back here and say, look, we are going to attract major investors in the next 6 months or the next 1 year. A lot of factors come in. If we achieve stability in the exchange rates, if you have a very liquid foreign exchange market, if you address the issue of insecurity in your country, if you have the right supply of supporting infrastructure that will help or facilitate industrial production, so you have people who come here to set up kind of manufacturing outlets that you expect. So because you have to look at where are those foreign investors going to come into. You have your oil and gas sector, which used to be the greatest attraction for foreign investors. So you have seen a massive exit of international companies from the country. And like one of the things I always say, that the president must be conscious of the fact that if people see other people, their likes running away from a location, they will have to ask, why are you running, before they jump in. So we must, in the first place, stem the rate at which foreign investors who have been with us for a long time are living. You have the likes of GSK leave, you have the likes of P&G leave. I mean, and these are real sector producers. And then you have comments like, Nigeria is not an environment where you can make sustainable dollar income over a period of time. So we need to address that, so that those who are here will stay with us. So that will entice those who are outside to say, wow, my brother is there, let me go and enjoy what he's enjoying. So the key thing is that before we talk about how much we should expect or how we should expect that, we need to even mark or identify those sectors that will attract investors. Are we, like what we did the GSM licensing, it was a reform and transformation of the telecommunications sector that attracted a lot of investors. Which sector are we looking at attracting investors? Are we looking at the financial services sector? Are we looking at physical infrastructure like transport infrastructure? Are we looking at the energy infrastructure? Are we looking at the oil and gas sector? Are we looking at educational sector? And then once we identify that sector, we build incentives around it. And then we address those issues that are acting as disincentive or kind of unhygienic factors that are scaring away investors.
As an expert, Mr. Chukwu, what sectors do you think that the president or this administration should prioritize, and what reforms should also be put in place?
I would say the energy sector is critical. Without energy, nothing functions. You and I are speaking because we have eaten. If you go 4 days of fasting and they ask you to come and speak for 1 hour, you are going to struggle. So energy is a critical input for any economy to be vibrant. So we need to address your power supply. That's critical. Second issue is transport infrastructure. Third issue is logistic infrastructure like the seaports and the airports. Then you look at the quality of your educational system. Then that does not ignore the fact that you must address the issue of insecurity. And there are a lot of multiplicity of actions that need to be taken to address insecurity. Another area that we have a competitive advantage in terms of solid minerals. We have a competitive advantage in terms of agriculture. But in terms of productivity to agriculture sector, it's still far below what the productive sectors in other sectors, other countries in the world. We need to address the issue of productivity to agriculture sector by providing supporting infrastructure like irrigation. In fact, the truth is that there is no sector in the Nigerian economy that has matured that or has even grown to a reasonable extent. So all the sectors in the economy both investment opportunities, but we must create incentives around them, and we must address the overarching challenges like energy supply, insecurity, transport infrastructure, logistic infrastructure, and enabling laws and rules that guide investment as well as economic activities in the country.
Right. So in their 2024 economic outlook for Nigeria, PwC are predicting, and I quote, they are saying that GDP may grow marginally by 3.1% on the back of sustained policy reforms, albeit growth prospects may be limited by elevated economic pressures. Do you agree? And what are these economic pressures?
The economic pressures will include things like low consumer demand. If you go to the shops now, you realize that most supermarkets are struggling to sell their goods. So you have low consumer demand because of weak household income. So that's one factor. You deal with the issue of insecurity. Remember, the agriculture sector accounts for more than 25% of the GDP. Agriculture sector grew at only 1.12% last year, the entire year on average. So it was only about 2.1% in the last quarter of last year. So that sector needs to start growing. And if you don't have an improvement in agriculture sector growth, they need to drag down other sectors growth because they account for about a quarter of our GDP. That's one of the headwinds we have to deal with. In terms of economic growth, the good thing we have is that it's a young economy. It's like a toddler economy. So if a child just gets, if you have a newborn baby and you just feed it, give it water and some milk, the child will keep growing. So that's what the economy will need, our economy needs. You just need to provide a conducive environment with some basic nutrition for the economy, several sectors of the economy to keep growing.
So I would like to also get your take on this statement. Inflationary pressures are expected to decline in 2024 due to the CBN's inflation targeting policy, which aims to rein in inflation to 21.4%. This was made by a statement made by Yemi Cardoso at the NESD meeting in January. The IMF has also said that the inflation rate will also decline in 2026 to less than 30%. What do you make of this?
I agree that we should expect inflation to decline towards the end of this year, and these are my own reasons. One is that we've seen an appreciation of local currency. Assuming the current appreciation is sustained, then the cost of imported goods will decline because you have to use a lower exchange rate for those goods to come in. So you're going to see a reduction in import-induced inflation. That's one key factor. The other more important factor is the base effect. If you recall, when the president announced that subsidy was gone in May, by June, we started to see sharp increase in inflation rates. So by the time you get to June, July this year, the base effect would have kicked in. Because when you talk about the base effect, it's just saying that you are measuring an increment on a higher base. So for instance, if the price of bread in July 2022 was 100 Naira a loaf, per loaf, and then by July 2023, it had gone to 150 Naira a loaf of bread. So it then means you are saying inflation rate on bread was 50% by July last year. If by July this year, the price increases further to even another 50 Naira. So what will you say? you are now measuring 50 Naira increase on 150 Naira base, which is a higher base. So instead of saying that the inflation rate in July 2024 is 50%, you will now have an inflation rate that is 30% or 33%, because it's now 50 Naira over 150 Naira, and that's the base effect, because you're now measuring increments on a higher base. So that base effect will kick in by the time we get to July this year, which would mean that inflation, you're going to have what we call disinflation. In the sense that price will be increasing, but at a lower magnitude compared to the rate at which they increased the previous year.
So, Mr. Chukwu, let's talk about what really matters to Nigerians at this moment. In all of this conversation, there's one thing that matters to Nigerians, which is finding the right framework and instrument to achieve price stability. Has anything, and that's commodity price, food prices, have you seen anything done in this regard?
Well, one of the things that will help achieve that price stability is the issue of exchange rate. I had mentioned that that if the current rate is sustained, in the next couple of weeks, you're going to see goods imported at those rates. Why we're not beginning to see import at those rates? Because rates continue to appreciate, and business people are waiting to see when it bottom out before they buy dollars and import, and then dollar rate drops further, and they will land at a cost that is higher than what their competition would land at. So that will lead to a level of stability. But the most important thing for Nigerian households is food inflation. Food inflation in the month of March was 40%, 40.01%. And that's actually what hurts, because an average Nigerian household consumption is more than 60% of food. I mean, household expenditure is more than 60% food. So until we achieve some moderation in food prices, then Nigerian household will continue to hurt. And that will only come if we address the issue of insecurity across the food producing belts. The concern is, even for me, is that in the next couple of months, that is the month of, we're just in the month of April. Remember, this is the planting season. There's always a lean period in Nigerian households, particularly in the rural areas, where there's what they call famine in the southeast. And that is a period when they are planted and they're waiting to harvest. And that is a period between May and middle of August. So we may actually see higher increase in food inflation for those periods and food prices. For the household, they need food production, which is actually what happens in every other country in the world. Most countries in the world ensure that an average household in the economy, in their country, will be able to feed themselves by even subsidizing food production in places like US or even Western countries, other European countries. We need to address the issue of food prices so as to give some relief to households in the country.
And what do you suggest we do to address this? Because some people have talked about price fixing. Some people have also talked about the idea of ensuring that supply is more than demand. And that way, prices usually will just go down on their own. But what do you suggest we do?
We just need to help the farmers in the food base of the country go back to their farms. We need to allow the man in Zamfara to go back to his farm without paying bandits. The people in Benue should go to their farms without this worry that the bandits will, herdsmen will attack them. The people in Borno should be able to go back to their farms. If we have, Nigerians used to feed themselves now, or Nigeria used to feed itself. The situation we're witnessing today is an aberration, principally because we have heightened, over time, now have heightened level of insecurity. I started, at some point, we thought it was a northeast thing. It has now spread to the northwest. Northwest used to be an oasis of stability, but now we're dealing with people in Zamfara, people in Katsina, people in Kaduna, people in Sokoto running away from their farms. We need to, once we address that, I think by the next planting season, we should see Nigerians go back to their farm. There are other bigger things to do, but let's even start from the small things. The bigger things I talked about irrigation, so that even the products we produce, like rice, we can have 2-season farming for rice, which will improve the productivity of the cultivated land we have today. Nigeria can produce both the upland rice and the paddy rice on the same farm if it's irrigated.
And before I let you go, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, what are your projections in terms of Nigeria's economic outlook? And do you think that Nigeria is in safe economic leadership of economic hands in terms of the leadership of Wale Edu and Yemi Cardoso, both of the Ministry of Finance and the CBN?
Well, what I would say is that the two men have an unenviable job on their hands. So I don't envy them. I don't wish to be in their position. So these men are working day and night to turn around the bad situation. In the course of that, they are also making mistakes. They are winning some, they are losing some. It's too early in the day to call, but I think they are putting in the very best, their very best effort to ensure that the economy recovers.
And I asked about your projections in terms of our economic outlook.
There are still a lot of uncertainties in the horizon. We need to make sure that we maintain FX stability. That's very key for us to even have some level of stability. We need to address the issue of high interest rates that are currently constraining productive activities, which will, in the medium to long term, have unintended negative consequences. So you are going to have a situation where you may have price stability, possibly lower inflation rates, but lower productive activities, which could lead to a slower than expected GDP growth in the current fiscal year.
And that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, MD CEO, Carry Assets Management Limited. You have a way of breaking these issues down. Always a pleasure to have you all.
Thank you for having me.
That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But remember, you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at midnight. You can also get in touch with us on social media. Our handles were on Facebook, Instagram, and on X at TVC News NG. And then you can use the hashtag Politics Tonight. We're also on YouTube at TVC News Nigeria. I am Precious Amayu. Thanks for watching.